machines that you will be looking at. It will give you a very detailed overview of how the disk management works. So basically, disk management is the management. Before I jump into the practical slides here, uh, disk management is used for not only for managing one disk. We always think of it managing a one disk, but think of it managing as multiple disks if you have. And by multiple disk, I mean is if you are maintaining a server which has which has more than one disk, right? Because at your personal level, yeah, you can have a laptop or a desktop which you will have probably one or at most two. On laptops, you always carry one. But what if you are to configure any um, server machine or any desktop which need more than two, and that's where your hands might get tired because you don't have, you always carry the laptop and you don't do that much this operation as much. And then do you think that okay, I will probably need to study? So that's why I choose in this topic it go in a little bit more detail so that you guys understand it. So when we bring the hard drives from the vendors or from Best Buy or from any shop, what we need to do is it's a raw drive that we bought. So that raw drive has to be first set up in a way that it is being recognized by our operating system. Um, and even before that, you need to make sure that your disk is properly initialized so that the very starting point or the very starting sector of that disk drive is known to the operating system. So that's where the initial that's where your heads or the head on the hard drive is, right? If you guys know, if you guys have seen the internal structure of the hard drive, if you look at the internals of the hard drive, this is actually, I would say this will be a better picture. This is uh, the internal of the hard drive. Its head, it's a physical head, it's a physical head moving. It's a very delicate structure inside, right? It's moving in. And it should know, let's say if your data is spread out on the drive, we think that the data, when let's say if there is a Word document, it will just go and fetch the data, let's say from this corner of the drive, and we have our data available. The hard drive in the data in the hard drive is spread out. Your data that you think of is in Microsoft Word format or any Excel sheet that you think, it's not stored on the hard drive on one place. It has the addresses of the whole file, where it says that okay, this is where the file is, this is where the starting point of the file is, and these are the different sectors where or different places on the drive where I need to fetch the data to make it a complete file, right? So what we think of the hard drive is not actually that's what is happening internally. The hard drive head is moving at a very fast speed because we are talking uh, hard drive speed as a mechanical head, but at that same time, it can over the period of time, hard drives do get damage internally, and it's a matter of only when they will go down, um, because they are mechanical structure and they break. They have certain lifetime attached to that. So it's a matter of when they break down. It's not how they break down. So you will have to be doing hard drive maintenances as well on the machines and the server machines and the desktops. So coming back to the topic is that when you bring the hard drive, for this experiment, for this lecture today, I'm thinking of, I have three drive, four drives actually, starting zero, disk one, two, and three. We'll be working on three drives, and we will be making the drives as such that um, we will be setting them in the possible way or combination that we can set the hard drives, right? So that's the things that we will be looking at. I'll start with this slide here. So we have the drive, our C drive, that is currently being read, and sometimes we see some extraneous partitions that are being created. uh, Mitesh has brought his drive. He was showing me the partitions, and it didn't it did confuse, throws me off a little bit. But when I looked at it, it wasn't. So it wasn't a problem. When you get the hard drive and you install Windows, Windows creates its own partitions. So when you bring the hard drive, let's say you bought a 500 GB hard drive, it's not necessary. It is not. It is actually that you will not get the full 500 GB. You will get 450 GB. Some of the partitions or the disk space is used by the operating system for its own maintenance, so it knows that where I need to start. So when you see those extraneous partition, you don't have to worry about. We just focus on the biggest partition that you're working. In this experiment, we have uh, this C drive. As I can see, it's a 40 GB drive. I can see 39.51, so I consider it as a 40 GB. Rest is used by the operating system, so I'm not worried about. Uh, the other three drives that I'm looking at, disk 1, disk 2, and disk 3, kind of hiding behind it, the disk 1, but as I can say, it is unallocated space. It's a 20 GB. This is the 20 GB, and this is a 20 GB hard drive space. The 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 very first way that I can use the hard drive is just mounting the drive as a folder, which I'm going to show you in a moment. Um, on this screen, you are seeing the format pattern. So every operating system first tries to make sure that the hard drive and its partitions are used that are used are recognizable by the operating system. So the operating system is that Microsoft Windows operating system. They use this NTFS operating system, and they are coming up with a new file system as well, which is called GPT. But at the moment, start with NTFS, which is a new technology file system. It's not a new technology, it's an old technology, but the abbreviation is NTFS, is a new technology file system. It's there for a long time. Uh, and as for Linux, you will see ext2, ext3, ext4, different types of partitions. So keep in mind that if you have an operating system, um, let's say if you have a dual boot operating system, let's say if on a system where you have Windows also running, and on that system, same physical system, not the virtual machine that I'm talking, on the same physical system, if you have another operating system like Linux running on it, and at the time when you press the power button on the system, it asks you whether you want to go to Linux or whether you want to go to uh, Windows. At that time, if you just select Windows, uh, when you log into Windows, Windows doesn't recognize the Linux partition. You will not be able to see. And same thing when you log in uh, on Linux, Linux doesn't recognize Windows partitioning system. There would be slight differences in them, and they have been forever. They don't, and it could be any other operating system, Unix or some other or other. Mac OS doesn't recognize Windows or based operating Windows file system. That's a file system. Things might have changed, but I know or there might be some compatibility patches that you might want to install, but from the start, I know that the operating systems doesn't recognize each other partitioning schemes. So at the moment, we are seeing the NTFS file system scheme, meaning that this NTFS file system scheme, and that is currently in blue, meaning it has been recognized and operating system is being installed on it. The other three drives that I have are at the moment not being recognized, and they are currently black, so they are unallocated space. So you start the drive with the unallocated space always. When you start with the unallocated space, the easiest way to go is that you want to set up an NTFS on. That's what I was mentioning. So you format you lay down the format across the board on the drive that you want it to be formatted as NTFS file system, which will be a which will be which as you are seeing, there's NTFS here. There are some other file system, but I don't want to go too much sideways here. So NTFS, and then you just create a volume label extra space. At the moment, I'm not giving a drive letter to it. As you can see, there is a C drive letter here, but do I want to give any drive letter to it? Let's see. No, I don't want to give any drive letter. What other thing I did is that I went on before I started doing this. I went on to the C drive and I created a folder. Don't worry about the folder icon here, but think of it that you went onto your C drive and you created a folder called extra space. And then what you did is you just went on and you said that I want to mount this hard drive as an NTFS, which was the previous step, onto this folder space, which is called extra space. Now, what will happen? What you actually has done is that this drive, which was disk one, you picked up the disk one and you created the the partition the whole you allocated the whole drive as an NTFS, and you mounted it not as a drive letter, but you mounted it as in a folder. So anything that you keep in this folder will actually not be going onto this physical C drive. It will be actually be going onto this disk space one NTFS file system, and that we can see in next few slides. So let's say you just mounted it saying that I want it to be mounted to an extra space folder, which I created on C drive, and then it will be an NTFS file system. And then what it will do, it will whatever you keep in this file will actually not be kept on C drive, because you mounted and pointed. You actually created a pointer that I wanted to put everything, whatever user is putting in extra space, go to this disk one, not to the initial disk zero. And that's what we are essentially doing here. It's saying how much space that you want to be allocating it, and I said uh, maximum space. So I said maximum of 350 GB, I want to allocate that, and then I click next, and then it will say finish. So it will be a little bit of wizard here, and then that's where you can start keeping your files in there. So that's a very basic one, and that's not the most usable one anyways, because you don't want to be mounting an external hard drive. Can be an external or internal, but if it would be an internal drive, it will be kept there. If you have a drive and there is another drive that you want to mount it in the desktop or a server, this will be an extra space. And if somebody wants to keep the files in the extra space, it will be kept in the extra space on that drive. Now I will move forward and I can create some new simple volume. So that new extra space that I created, I don't need it. I can go ahead and delete it, because as I said, you just mount it on that extra space, the extra drive that you have. And that I only used disk one. I never used actually disk two or disk three. It's up to me how, if I want to use it, disk 2 and disk 3, and mount them to another folder and folder name on my C drive, it can be mounted as well. But just for experimenting, I'm just being staying there and just going to be deleting that. Now want to start with the okay, I'll go to the bottom here, actually start here. So that will be the last thing that I wanted to mention, but I mentioned it first. But you got the idea. So I'll just want to be here first. So if you have three disks that you just bought from the market, you plug them in. You have three disks that you have, and you have disk one currently unmounted because it's not known. It's an unallocated space. Same thing with this. So as I said, you need to uh, first thing first is that you will set up the master boot record on those drive as well. The when you bring in the raw devices or raw disks, they have to be initialized. As you can see right now, when you plug them in, the disk 1, it has a red symbol in front of it, same as disk 2 and disk 3 as well. So what you need to do when you plug them in, you have to place the master boot record on each of them as well. What you do in master boot record is that when you set the master boot record, it just knows where is the initial sector, or where is the initial point where the head has to be to start reading the information. Because if if you think of a hard drive, when you place the head on the hard drive, as you saw in that picture which I was showing in the start, it knows where the starting point of the drive is. And when it goes to that, so let's say this is the hard drive, and this is the hard drive head, and the hard drive head is moving across and reading the information. It will be so fast, but at the first address, it knows I need to go to the second address, because it's two parts. First part is the data part on the drive, and the second part is where is the next address. Then it reads the data on the second sector, and it says where I need to go next. So it contains two parts. So basically what MBR does on the master boot record does is that you create that if this will be a bootable drive, where you need to start this drive. So that is the essential purpose of the master boot record. So you initialize all these three drives, disk 1, disk 2, and disk 3. For the demonstration purposes, they are very small devices. In the real world, you might get bigger drives, but the idea is to give you an idea of how the disk initialization works. Because what has been done in this experiment, they bought some cheap 20 GB hard drives just to show you the experiment, how actually drives work together. Instead of bringing 500 GB drives, the ideology will still stay the same. It doesn't matter if it's a 20 GB hard drive or it's a 500 GB hard drive. So I explained the last part of this lecture first, showing you that you can mount as a folder the devices, the hard drive. But nonetheless, that is not used too much. But I was showing you that it could be one of the way that you can set up um, the folder on the drive as well. Now, when you click on MBR, it says that you want to initialize it. So this is the new technology as I was mentioning. Either you can do it an MBR way, or you can use a GUID partition. MBR is there forever. If you want to use it as a GUID or GPT partition, you can do that as well. The GPT partition style is not recognized by all previous versions of Windows. So uh, that GPT partition is, as what it is saying, is not recognized, meaning that if you are going to use it, it will be a little faster. But MBR, if there is an MBR based drive, then it will not be able to read the GPT base. So it should be across the board. All the devices should have a similar partitioning style. Either it would be MBR or GPT. At the moment, if we are going with an MBR one, all the devices will recognize each other because they are on the same MBR pattern. If they are all in GPT pattern, then they will be all be recognized. But it could not be done that you will have some as an MBR and couple of other hard drives as a GPT base. So you can choose in between, and it's up to you how you want to go it. So I will go with the GPT base, and what we can do is we can, even after conversion, if we set it up as a GPT, we always have the power to convert it into an MBR based MBR based disk. So we can convert it, but keep in mind, playing with the disks is that uh, uh, you can be at a loss of data, right? So don't, if you make up your mind if you want it to be an MBR based or a GPT based. If you go with an MBR based, then keep it all across the board same. And I think this C drive is set up as MBR based, and all these other three disk 1, disk 2, and disk 3 are also set up as MBR based. So you can always, once they are being set up as GPT and you click OK, that's fine. But if you want to set up as a MBR, you can convert them. But once you start writing the data on these disks, it's not recommended that you change them from GPT to MBR. So it's either or none. At the start, you have flexibility to change. Once you start putting the critical data of the company, it's not recommended. As you can see, there are different ways that I can set up this disk. At the moment, we are setting up the partitioning style. So the partitioning style that we selected is GPT, but we can convert into MBR, and that's what we are going to do. We convert each of them to be an MBR disk. Now, other thing that you notice here, when I plugged in these devices, when I just plugged them in with the power and the hard drive cable, they were all not initialized, and they were all marked red. As soon as I set up the partition style on them, they became online, right? So this is a kind of a starting point. So now my question raises here is that when I bring this USB external drive from market and I just plug in, it automatically plugs and play. The way it is that most of the devices that we buy off the shelf from the market, the external ones, they always come with the uh, initialized and partitioned and everything with window with the NTFS or file system set on them, so you don't need to worry about that. But if you buy an external raw hard drive, then you will have to go through this step and set it up. Uh, so that's the only difference. So being a techie guy, it will be asked that if you buy the hard drives, you need to uh, initialize them after you plug them with the power and everything. And sometimes, and I want to mention is that hard drives on the servers are very hot swappable. They are not like you have to shut down the computer and then you take the um, nuts and the screws away and then you plug in. They are hot swappable, means at the runtime you can plug in the hard drive and it will latch onto the motherboard, and the motherboard starts to read them and you can start to initialize them and whatnot. They are hot swappable, so you can just do it on the fly, and you don't have to shut down anything. With our computers at home, yes, we obviously, if you are want to putting up one or two extra drives, we need to put them. If it is not a USB drive, then obviously if it is going into the internal of the desktop, then we have to shut it down and plug it in. So that's one other thing. If somebody says what is hot swappable hard drive, you should need to understand what it is. And there are some uh, NAS or some other devices where you can, if your server doesn't have the space for hot swappable, where would you put it? You can have it on the network area storage, or there's a box that comes in where you can plug in multiple devices on the fly on the or hot swappable device, and then you can connect it to the server, so you will have an extra space on your server if you haven't had a space on the server. Coming back to the topic, um, you initialize the devices. Now, the first thing I wanted to do is start with that is you want to set up a new simple volume. New simple volume is the very basic volume that you want to set up, is that you want the each individual device, each individual disk as an individual. So new simple disk, just like acting as this disk 0, it will be a new simple volume as a disk one, and you can do it with what you can do is if you click next, you want to set up a new simple volume, it will give you a small bits of wizards with 2 or 3 steps. That's what we will be looking at. If you say next, it will say how much space you want to give. You say I want to allocate the whole drive, and then you'll say okay, uh, click next. Or if you want, you can do a partition. So let's say this is a 20 GB hard drive. You want to create 2 partitions on it. You can create 2 partitions. So this is a 20 GB hard drive. I can cut it into half. As I was mentioning, the logical partition. The physical device is itself is 20 GB, but this can be cut into 2 pieces, 120 or 10 GB each, right? So that's what it is we are doing. So said I want to set up this on the E drive on this drive, which will be 10 GB. So let's go ahead, and it's saying that how do you want to format it? I want to format it as an NTFS. So first step, when I started, just to repeat, you select a simple volume, You select a simple volume. Next step, it asks that, are you sure you want to create a simple volume because you don't want to lose the data if there is any data? Just a precaution. It's a precaution kind of a stage. And then it says that, uh, I have found this device is 20 GB. How much you want to allocate? You said I want to allocate 10 GB out of it. And then it says, do you want to assign a letter to it? I said yes, I want to assign a letter E to it. um, and I was mentioning the last part, which I will go back anyways when I will go up the slides. I'll cover this part as well again one more time. If it's needed, it's better to repeat one more time if I will be there, just to remove any further confusion. So if I have E drive, I want to mount it. It says that how do you want to format it? Because as I said, disk is initialized using MBR or GPT, but um, it has to be adapted by Windows, and Windows will adapt it only if the file system is according to its liking. So right now, the file system that we are choosing is NTFS. So now it will quick format it. If we uncheck this quick format, it can take us an hour or two, maybe, or half an hour, depending upon the size. So if it's a 500 GB drive, it can take a couple of hours. If it's a 20 GB drive, it may be 10 to 15 minutes, depending upon the size. I always go by this in this day and age. I always go by perform a quick format. Once I click a quick format, I can select that and next. As I was mentioning, there are some other file systems available with Microsoft. The very older one is called FAT32, and the new one is called VFS. But nonetheless, we are still going to select NTFS. So FAT32 is like with Windows XP and Windows 98 not going to be used anymore. NTFS is there forever and it's being used by server operating system. REFS, which probably they will be going into in the future. So that's what they have introduced it here in the drop down, but I'll still go with NTFS. So I will name it this E drive, which will be a logical partition on this disk one as a half, and I'll can name it as a simple volume. And I'll click next, and it says this is the summary of everything that will going to be happening. That you are selecting disk one, that you will have 10 GB of space. The drive name letter will be E, and the file system will be NTFS. The volume label will be uh, simple volume, and you want a quick format on it. So it's a small summary. If you don't agree with anything, you can go back. But for the most part, I agree with it, and I click finish. Here you go. The simple volume is now created. I can go on my file explorer, and I can see that out of that 20 GB, only 10 GB is used, and it is only showing me 10 GB. That you will be asking what happened to the rest of the 10 GB, because it's been black in color and it's unallocated. It means that that drive still has a space, but it is not being shown to the user. So that 10 GB hard drive is available to me on this space anyways. So I can see um, I have 10 GB space available, and that's what I'm going to be using on that drive. If I want to increase, sure enough, I can increase that, but that's a matter that's what we're going to look at in a moment. Now, that's the thing. I gave I showed only the user only how much 10 GB. Later on, I think okay, I need to show a little bit more. Maybe if it I would be a 20 GB drive, I showed user initially, or me myself is playing with that hard drive that is 20 GB. I want to increase the uh, drive size from 10 GB to 20 GB. I have the flexibility of it available. I can do that. I go here and I'll say extend, right click on this partition, which is already blue, which is already the same as my NTFS, and my C drive and my operating system already recognize this simple volume E. I can right click on it and say uh, extend this volume, which is only 10 GB, extend it to another 10 GB, which is almost like 9.87. And as I said, out of 20 GB, you will not get all the 20 GB. You will lose a little bit of data, a little bit of space anyways. So you can extend it. Keep in mind when you are extending the disk's uh, volume, from one logical partition to another logical partition, they both have to be next to each other. So if I'm extending from E to this partition here, they have to be very next to each other. If there is another partition that comes in between that is unallocated, and that can you might see, you are not seeing it in this example, but there are some other partitions that you see that there is another partition, which is let's say uh, F and G, and you want to connect E with G. That will not happen. You have to first extend E to F, and then you go from F to G, and then it will be all will be it will adapt. So E will adapt F and make it E. And then when you have extra space allocated, then you adapt G and adapt it in E. So E will eat up all F and G partitions and make it allocated inside it. They have to be right next to each other when you are eating up the partitions. So just think of a Pac-Man game. When you are eating up the partition, it will be adapted in that partition. So you right click on extend the volume, and you can click extend, and it says that I found that you can add this 10 GB here, and that's what I'm gonna do that right now. I'm not going, although it is also showing me that there are disk 2 and disk 3 available. You want to eat up that as well as an E partition, I can do that, but at the moment I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to say that I want to extend this E partition and eat up this space. So let's do that, and I'll say finish. And as you can see, now the whole world is available for me. I have this, what I have successfully done. I have not touched this 2 and this 3, these are for later, but I have now eaten up this whole E drive is just a space for me where I am keeping my data. So C drive is where I can keep my space. It's 40 GB, and uh, this 20 GB space is my E drive where I can keep my data as well. But as I mentioned, we need some sort of redundancy, and that is coming up uh, in the next few slides. What is redundancy is that you want to spread out the data in a format that you, if your hard drive or you lose the data on a particular drive, you will be able to recover it from the other disk. Um, so it's not a backup strategy, I would say. It's just like keeping the data on across um, multiple drives so that you can go back to your data if it is not available. So what you do usually, you usually do copy and pasting. So let's say if you have a data on C drive and you want to make a copy of it, you want to make a copy of that folder and paste it in D drive, you should be good. If you lose it on C drive, you always will have it available on your E volume, right? But that's not the that's a manual process of doing copying and pasting the data. You want some kind of automation coming into it, and that will be when will be touching the further into this topic. There are different types of volumes that we looked at. We will be covering all of these, and we will be covering we can also shrink that this volume once it's been allocated. We can also shrink it. So this is like 20 GB. I know I haven't used all of it, so I can also shrink it and split the partition back into E drive and F drive. Again, if I want to do it, I can click on shrink, and I'll say I want to shrink it into half, or whichever way I want it to be. I want to shrink it. So as you can see, there's a number 20 GB size available to shrink. Yes. So what it is saying is that, let's say if you have some data available on that drive, on this drive now, it will not allow you to shrink it to that extent that it will chop off that data. It will only show that you have this much space, this drive size is this much, but you can be only be able to shrink up to this much space. So enter the size. So you will read this out loud. If I say size of the available disk space is this much, and enter the amount of the uh, space you want to shrink. So I have 17 GB available that I can shrink. total size after shrink, it will be 3 GB. So let's do that. Actually click on shrink and let's see how, enter the amount you want to shrink. So I want to say, so there will be a 7 GB that I will be shrinking, that I will be keeping, and then 10 GB that will be cut into half. So let's do that. So as you can see, oh no, it's actually saying that, okay, so it's a size available for shrink. So it is not giving me a full freedom of how much ever I can shrink. It is just keep giving me a little bit of saying that heads up that I cannot be that this out of out of that 20 GB, I only have 17 GB available for shrinking, not the whole 20 GB for shrinking. So it says that, yes, I cut this into half. I'm back to the square where I was able to extend. Now I'm able to shrink it or split into half. So this is again a logical partition on on a one physical disk. So you can create, and um, this is the same knowledge you will take when you will go to the Linux operating system. The partition, think of the partitioning as a uh, as a play area where you can, so you have, this is at this moment we are looking at the play area where we are just chopping off, adding the partition, extending the partition, shrinking the partition, adding the folder as a partition. All right, so that's what we are looking at it at the moment. So this is our simple volume. We can extend it back, we can extend it back and extend it back to what we want. And here you go, it is extended back to this volume. Now, can we further extend? We have this disk one that is already uh, covered. Now, can we extend it to disk two and disk three? Can we? Right click on it, and it says that now the next available extension is for you is to available at disk two or disk three. That's it. You have used the whole disk one. If you want to further extend, you are out of space. You have either have to select disk two or disk three. At the moment, we are seeing we selected disk two and moved it to the other side of the selected side, and we are saying I want to use disk two, the whole of the disk two. Let's do that. It says that okay, I will extend from here and it will be treated as one whole E drive. Even though the drive letter is E, which when we created was on disk 1, but now we are expanding it to disk 2. So even though E volume, which was on the disk 1, when you extend it, it will span itself to two disks. So kind of a way of looking at it is that yes, two disks can represent one drive letter. Yes, it can. And that's what we are going to do. It says that the operation you are selecting is just giving you a warning that if there is some data that is available on disk 2, that will be erased because you will not be able to restart an operating system from any of the will convert the basic disk into a dynamic disk. So it will be going from here and going to this too. Are you sure you want to do this? Just a confirmation of anything. And they are also saving themselves, saying that if there is any data on this drive, that will be kind of erased because it's kind of you are accumulating any. Keep in mind, if when you are extending and shrinking, the data will not be lost. Oh, the only time the data will be lost is that if you are if you shrink it to an extent where it is not allowed, and it will not allow you to do that. So you extend it, it will be extending, it will saying that I will be doing this. So as you see this, it has changed the color. So what it is doing, it's spanned over disk 1 and disk 2. So the color of it has changed is just for you to know that, just to show you that disk 1 and disk 2 are two isolated disks on their own as a physical, but this whole simple volume which was only spanned before this step, it was only spanned to this whole disk, is now spanned to two disks. So it's changed the color legend for you, so you know that what is happening out there. Because sometimes if you look at it and if the color is not changed and you think okay, what is happening out there, you will not be able to have an idea. Now other thing that to keep in mind, that the disk volume E and this disk volume E is now treated as one volume. So one logical E drive partition that we started with this dynamic disk 1, is now being changed to this dynamic disk 2. It is not simple disk version anymore. It's a dynamic disk, right? So it's a dynamic disk between disk 1 and disk 2. But keep in mind, if um, this hard drive goes bad, the whole of the volume E will become unusable. Why? Because it's the data is spanned across the both the disk. So as I was mentioning in the start of the lecture, when I was mentioning that when you have the disks, uh, when you create a Word document, you think that you created a Word document, it will go and save on one particular spot on the drive. That's not the case. It's been it's been stored on the drive on several different locations, and when you call that or open up that document, it just goes and find that whole all of the pieces together, bring them, and then show you a whole Word document. What has happened here, because we have spanned it across two drives, what will happen when you save a document, it might have been, and it quite possibly been, that when you save it, it may be a part of it may have been stored on disk volume one disk 1, and part of it might have been saved on disk 2. So you might have a correct part of, or some part of the data, or some part of the document available here, but unfortunately, if the disk 2 goes bad, or I unplug disk 2, you might have some part of it is stored on here, and that's where it breaks it. If that hard drive goes bad, or if it's a hard swappable and I take it out, you will lose the data. So this is again not a good technique. We have to start learning how to make sure that one disk is able to complement another disk, that if one disk goes bad, other disk raise up his hand and says that no, I still have that data available, I can vouch for it, I can bring that data. So spanned volume, I'm just showing you that this is one way of storing the data or keeping the volumes like this. I will not cover this whole lecture today for this. I just started to show you what is a spanned volume, and this is the spanned volume you are looking at it right now. Now, this whole drive that I'm looking at now, even though they are two physical drives, one each of 20 GB and this is 20 GB, but it is showing me, because it's a spanned volume, although it is showing me a simple volume here because the label I haven't changed, I have just extended and expanded. So it is showing me 40 GB is being used. I know that at the time I'm looking at it as one shot, it is one physical, it looks to me as if it is one physical hard drive, but it is actually not. There are two physical disks spanned across one partition and showing me as a one copy, right? So this is the one stage that you can now look at. What are some other ways we can set up the wall these days. So I'm going to refresh. So I'm just going to see what other options I have. So I'm just going to delete this partition, make them unallocated spaces again. So this will become black and black as well. So I'm going to delete this, and I'm going to delete this. I'm not worried about what will happen on what I'm going to see on the disk volume on the side where it is showing me E drive, but I'm just going to say that I'm going to delete the whole volume. So if I go and delete the whole volume, basically what will happen? Deleting this volume will erase the data on it, and it doesn't say which on which drive it will erase the data. It will erase the data on both of the drives. So if you say right click and back up the data you want, it is just giving a warning. If you want to do this and you want to delete the volume, it will delete the whole data out of it. So if you say yes, actually what has happened, because they are punched together as one drive and you deleted the whole volume, both of those two, disk 1 and disk 2, became unallocated, right? So you have lost the data, if you have any, you have lost the data on both the disk, and they have become unallocated. Now what you're going to do, you will set up another way of doing it. And why I'm going to say another way, we have just looked at new simple volume, we have looked at spanned volume, but spanned volume was created because I was fortunate enough, because I was expanding it, like, or extending it from one disk to another disk. it automatically created an span volume for me. I could have created the span volume when I select this option. So we now know two strategies to set up the drive, and we will look at all the rest of the three as well, and the fourth one as well, which is the in the very beginning of the lecture, which I was explaining to you guys. So new simple volume we looked at. We can create a new simple volume. We can, so if we have bunch of drives sitting in there that will be going onto the server before we plug it into the drive, this the whole practice that we are doing here is to understand how the hard drives work in together and as an individual, and disk manager is a good tool to do that. So if you have three hard drives, 500 GB each, and if you are trying to, before you plug it into the server, you plug it into your desktop where you have three controllers, which is highly unlikely. But if you are even doing it on the server on after hours time, you can play with the drives and understand what each of these disk partitioning scheme do for us. So the next one I'm going to look at, and that's where I will gonna stop for lecture for today. I'll cover mirror and RAID 5 in the next lecture, but I want to show the stripped volume. And let's say what does stripped volume does. So you right click on it, you say striped volume. When you say striped volume, it will say what are the two drives that you want to include. So this is the first drive that, and then I say that I want to use a second drive. So what a striped does is that it actually keeps the data across the two drives, some similar to span, but uh, but the thing is, half of the data goes in half of the data. So we didn't knew in the strand one that how much part of that document went into the disk one and how much part of that document goes into disk two. We don't know on the span one, but on the stripped one, it will be cut into half and half. So it's still not a good strategy. I know it is happening. 50% of the data will go to disk 1 and 50% of the data will go to disk 2. Stripped volume is still not adding a fault tolerance to my system. What I mean by fault tolerance is that if one drive gets fault, how much tolerance I have or how much toleration I have, that or how much redundancy I have, that if I will be able to get that data from the other drive. If you look at the definition, it's an operating system definition as well, which I want to mention. Somebody may ask you that what is fault tolerance? What is fault tolerance? If I look at this definition here, fault tolerance is the property that enables a system, any system. It is not just related to computer system. It's just any system that we are talking about. Is the ability of the system to continue operating in the event of the failure of one or more fault within. So what can happen is that, let's say if you have a drive, that has failed, your server, on the server, if the drive get failed, what will happen? You will be running and saying we need to just quickly um, uh, be up and running as soon as possible. Or let's say if you don't, if on a server machine you don't have a UPS, which is ultimate power supply, right? If you don't have that, what you will do? And if there's a power outage in the area, what you will do? Will you be running to the market and buying a new UPS at that time? No, you need to set up those fault tolerance before the event happens. So it's a system tolerance that you need to generate, and that's what we are trying to generate, the system tolerance. So far we have looked at different strategies of the disk drives, but still we haven't accomplished to a point that if one drive fails, the other drive is not able to keep up with it and saying that I will bring the data in. What we need here is that if one drive goes fail, the other drive says, oh, I have the copy of it and I'll bring it, right? So that's still not going to happen, but I'm still showing you the striped volume. The striped volume will come in a different color. So if I'll just say I want to join two disks together, disk 1 and disk 2, and I'll say I want to name them as E, but keep that in mind, in the striped volume it will be half and half. So if I'll say create a new volume, and it says that what's the new volume you want to give. I'll just keep it as a new volume name. I can change it. I can change it to a striped volume. Oh yeah, I am changing it to a striped volume name, and I said format is into an NTFS. As soon as I click finish, what will happen? It will say, are you sure you want to do this? It will always ask you to do this, even though you know you don't have any data, but for the safe side, Microsoft want to show this message saying that when you do this, you will lose all the data, although I don't have any data on it anyway. So I'll just say yes. Now it says striped volume is created. It's not purple in color, it is green in color. And as I mentioned, nothing much of a different between striped volume versus the spanned volume, except in the spanned volume, we don't know whether if it's a 70-25 or it's 80-20%, but in the striped volume, it is certain that 50% of the data is stored on disk E on the disk 1, and this 50% of the data is stored on disk 2. That's where I want to stop it here for today, because we are dealing with disk management in detail. Part of it would be applicable to the home users, where I was saying what is um, disk extension, what is disk shrinking, right? You can do and play around with that home. Some of it doesn't apply to you, but you are getting the feel of it. What does each of it means? Creating a disk as a spanned volume, creating a disk as a simple volume, creating a disk as a striped volume. What has happened? What has happened? So I'm just going to stop it here, because I don't want the information overload here as well, because we are going through a lot of slides here. Any questions so far? I will try to cover this in the next lecture and finish this up there.
No, Mr. Khan, we're good. Yep, well explained.
Okay. All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you.
No, everything's fine.
Okay, Mariana. Thank you.
Great work.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Kishore.
Thanks, guys. Bye.